comfortably zoned with the Zigzag Man in Alameda, California, pushing on the doors of life marked pull and fighting the Unholy Trinity as we go. Big business, organized religion, and government.
Before you push the button, where do you want to go with this? Do you have an idea, or are you just going to wing it?
I think we're going to go to purgatory with this, and the button's been pushed.
All right, purgatory it is. Okay. Are there any subjects that you really are careful of? Are there any subjects you're cautious about at this point?
Oh, absolutely. Anything involving bestiality.
Okay, all right. Stay away from sex. But otherwise, politics are good.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are in the midst of a production meeting between my guest and I. His name is Sam Zervitz. And am I pronouncing that right?
Absolutely, got it.
Sam Zervitz, you're from Baltimore, Maryland. You are one of the most interesting Facebook friends that I have. And I'll tell you, Comfortably Zoned Radio would not be what it is without me talking to passionate people who have opinions and like the microphone. And I'm just guessing that because he is passionate, he does have opinions, and he likes the microphone. Am I guessing right, Sam?
You're guessing right. Yep. Couldn't have embellished it any better. Okay.
All right.
We're all set.
So Sam's purpose in being here is 12-fold. Number one, he's going to help me for a moment fight what I call the Unholy Trinity, and that is organized religion, big business, and government. And the way I look at it, they are all banding together, fighting together to make things hell on earth for we the people. And we all in this world who look at things along the same lines have a particular pet peeve. With me, it's separation of church and state. I think that takes care of a lot. But I don't know Sam real well, so I'm just going to ask him right off the cuff, because these interviews are very spontaneous, as my listening audience know. What's your pet peeve? What do you come up across that just sticks in your craw that you just can't seem to stomach? What is it in life?
Transparent dishonesty. In power and in authority, where the power and the authority somehow delineates the dishonesty in a way that you have to buy it because it's them. And I've worked in jobs where where everything was blatantly dishonest, and because of the job, and then afterward I kind of regretted it a little bit. My 40-year-old career was in public education as a public information officer, and I like to call it defending the indefensible, because we never educated anybody. So that I would say that it starts at that. It starts at the top. And with religion, I think your optimum word is organized.
Right.
Because I think you can take it disorganized, because then you can personalize it.
Yeah, I'm talking about the hierarchy of the individual religions, not the sheep that go along. My issue with them is they become enablers by giving the money, giving the kids to sit on clerics' laps, whatever it is, they're feeding into the system, being enablers. But they don't control. They just want to worship. And you're right. When they get organized, then the hatred starts coming in, the polarity between different religions and different faiths and this and that, and the craziness comes in when we hate because we're tribal. And
that's it.
Is that what you're talking about?
That's where I'm coming from. Also, it's big business. And it's I mean, I always heard that and years ago I read this somewhere, that if the Catholic Church organized crime and the oil interests paid taxes, nobody else would have to. among other things. It was just something that came to mind. But I looked, for instance, I looked at...
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. All right. I know you go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to say something that comes to mind for me along those lines. If they would liquidate, they could feed the hungry, educate the curious, and we pay no tax. Life would be great. You send rubbers to Africa. You stop AIDS.
Okay.
It would
go.
Right?
I go along with that.
Kids and their parents don't have to sue the church. Parents going in, look what you guys did to my son, who now has a high voice, and he walks around. No, lady, you left your kid with Father O'Brien. You got to be culpable yourself. The idea is don't sue, bring it out in public, let them implode from within. Let the people say, wait a second, we can't keep going to this church anymore. We can't. This is crazy. We can be religious, but we could do it at home, very inexpensively. You just look up, and there your imaginary friend is, waiting to talk to you. It could be anybody. It could be. Mine is Thor. Well, I'm a Thor guy these days. I think
you can be a Thor. Thor's good. I like druids. I thought a tree was always good. I'm for trees.
Well,
I go for trees.
George Carlin used to say, it's all about my God has a bigger dick than your God.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
The other thing is that's disturbing, and I don't know if you follow this. And I like this Pope until he took the Palestinian side on things. But when this Pope makes a trip, he's the austerity Pope. And when he makes a trip, I mean, if it costs under $10 million, it's probably a cheapie. I mean, I don't know. I just think instead of making one trip a year, give the money to the poor people from somewhere. And say, I'm calling this trip off. I'm going to send this millions of dollars here, there, and
one less outfit a day could feed a lot of people.
Yeah, and he's the poor guy.
And he's
I'd hate to think what he's supposed to be the poor Pope. I don't understand his poverty.
An awful lot. You can see how he's back. He's just given up an awful lot. And how many refugees has the Vatican taken in? How many Syrian refugees? Yeah,
they're not doing much with that either. And but I really resent his taking the Palestinian position on things. I mean, he should like Israel, especially since in that part of the world, so many. I don't know whether he cares much for Christians as part of as denominationally out of the venue, but I'm upset that Coptic Christians in Egypt and the ones in Iraq are being slaughtered, and he's not opening his mouth. He's very quiet about that.
It's so surprising that a Catholic would support some people that hate Jews so much, huh?
Yeah, that and by the way, a little anecdotal story. I lived in Israel for a few years in the '60s. And we were in Nazareth for Christmas Eve, actually, 1963. We were in Nazareth for Christmas Eve, and we didn't have anywhere to go. So a bunch of us hung out at the Grand Union Hotel till about midnight when everybody went to their rooms, and we got thrown out. We were thrown out of the Grand. So it was kind of like there's no room at the inn. And we were walking around Nazareth, and we went into a deserted monastery. Christmas Eve in Nazareth. In a deserted monastery, freezing to death until we saw an Arab cab come by. And there were 3 girls and 3 guys in our party. And then we waved to the cab, and this is kind of like the end of the story, and the cab came by, stopped, put the 3 girls in the cab and took off and left us standing there. So our only recourse was to call our friend Fauzi, whose parents owned the biggest appliance store in Nazareth, and he had some power. So we found Fauzi on the phone. Fauzi must have made a phone call because the cab came back about 20 minutes later, let the girls out, and took off again. But that was our religious experience, was being in Nazareth on Christmas Eve and getting kidnapped.
That's very serious.
I mean, and then finally we got back to the kibbutz, which was about 20 minutes down the road. But Nazareth was a nice place to visit, but you wouldn't want to live there. at the time. Anyway, little anecdote, little aside.
Facebook. Sim, you don't even know this. All of a sudden, you and I are communicating on Facebook, and I had no idea, still don't know, how you and I found each other. But I liked you instantaneously because I took the liberty of Googling. And you're so articulate, you're so well-spoken, and you have the same ideals as I do, in the sense that I think we both look to socialism, Bernie style, as the flavor of the day. And I took the liberty, when I really started to like you, I said, there's a man who sticks up for himself. Because when I Googled you, you didn't take life lying down. Somebody messed with you. You went to the movies. Do you remember that? I'll bet you do. And and you weren't satisfied when you were ripped off. And you want to tell me a little bit about that story and how they came about? Because I
have to be careful here, but that was a defining moment. And the defining moment was I was sitting in, actually, a quick take on this, sitting in the Health and Human Services office with a friend.
Bring everybody into how this started.
This is it, and we're sitting there, and we're looking at the pairings, the final whatever it is, the big dance, the basketball NCAA pairings, and it was in this had to be in the early 70s, and we're looking, or actually late 60s, we're looking at this, and finally, and the guy I'm with, Chris, says it's he's doing homeless services, I'm doing literacy, we're doing something. Anyway, he says, thinking about this, suppose one of these teams, and this was way before Manute Bol and way before the 7'6" players were coming out of Africa. He says, suppose somebody finds a big kid from an African tribe, and all of a sudden, before the 64, starts, 32, 16, 8, 4, before this starts, comes up with this player who's like 10 feet tall. And we're laughing about it. So we went over to the library and we found some material. And there were very tall tribes in Africa. So I started writing something, and I thought, gee, this is good. This is the way you do it. It's recruiting. And recruiting in its early days, they weren't really running around the world yet recruiting players from here, there, and everywhere. And I'm a basketball fan. So this recruiting story started to kind of ferment. And then a few years later, I was somewhere else, and I started writing it. And I wrote a 7-page synopsis where the coach of a small Catholic school in the East decides to go to Africa to find a big player. and he's on his own, and he hooks up with the safari, and he finds his big player, and then toward the middle of the movie, he kind of sides with the tribe, and they've got a tribal war, and on, and at the end there's a ball game instead of a war, and I put it together, and somehow, and I knew some people in the business, and I sent it, and I got a letter back, and the letter said, good, we want to do it. And then I never heard from him again, and I wrote it as a book. And I found an agent. The agent had it sold as a book, the coach recruiting out of the country. And he sold it. He had it sold if I could get it down to 400 pages. And then all of a sudden my kids come running and yelling, Dad, it's a movie. So we found this wonderful, wonderful lawyer who took it on contingency. And after 4 years, we actually had a court case, and we won. And we beat half of Hollywood. I mean, they brought in writers, they brought in producers, they brought in directors, they brought in presidents of companies, they brought in everybody. They claimed it was a coincidence. They claimed they thought of it first. So we had a jury trial, and we won. And and that was kind of like, then I started to realize I can write. If I can write for them, good enough for them to steal it, so I must be pretty good. And then I got a nod.
Absolutely.
It's a confidence builder. It took 4 years, and then the jury comes out, and it's like there's God in the courtroom. And the jury rules against 5 defendants, and then they, and I mean, I couldn't believe half of the local law school was in there, because the venue's usually on the West Coast, where everybody steals. But here nobody thought stealing was a good thing. So all of a sudden stealing was bad. We won, and it was one of those things. And that happens to you. And 4 years it took to get the jury, to get it together, to get a jury. They kept stalling and motion to dismiss and motion to this and motion. And finally the jury ruled in our favor against all 5 defendants, and we won. And it was one of those things where you're sitting there, and all of a sudden you see God in the courtroom. And he must have been on our side, because anything could have gone wrong, but everything went right. And it just all fell into place at the end. It was a beautiful thing, and it was like it wasn't even about money; it was about righting a wrong.
That's exactly
and they steal.
What I was thinking when I started this conversation. It's about right or wrong. Hey, you're Popeye. That's all I could stand. I can't stand no more.
Well, I'm kind of like I sort of spin my wheels too. I'm Don Quixote too. I do a lot of wheel spinning, and
right.
And you can't win them all, but this was a big one. And then
tilting at windmills.
Yeah, but this was huge. This was one huge industry. And us, and and then they're looking at Baltimore like, who are you? Yeah. And then at the end, when the jury came out, they found out, it was a classic David and Goliath.
Hey, let's talk.
And what? I'm sorry. What?
A little Bernie Sanders. I'd like to talk your views.
Okay. I assume you like Bernie for what he's worth.
A lot for.
Except that he hasn't mentioned Israel yet. And I'm waiting for him to get caught up in some. The Republicans are all about foreign policy. And Hillary's all about Benghazi. And Bernie's all about share the wealth, which is okay because, here's a share the wealth anecdote you should know about, by the way. And I read this somewhere, and I put it in articles. In fact, I got an article rejected for some. I got an article in our local paper a few years ago. Donald Trump shows up in the harbor with his yacht, his 700-stateroom yacht, takes up the whole harbor. And I'm walking around the harbor looking at this thing, 700 state, whatever he's got. The yacht took up 3 blocks. And it cost probably hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And I'm thinking, if Trump can put that kind of a thing together and float it down here like a toy, that could feed half the East Coast, half the poor people on the East Coast. So I wrote an article, and I mentioned that Trump's boat is a little ostentatious. Why not use the boat to feed people, sell the boat, feed people? And then the final formula was, and I don't know if this is still true, but this was a while ago, the final formula about money is if you took all the money in this country and you divided it up among all the people in this country, everybody would have about $10,000. That's the ultimate, and that would be the ultimate in socialism. But the great truth is, within 5 years, the people who had 90% of it would get it all back from you because they know something you don't know.
Yes.
Anyway, but Bernie, back to Bernie. Bernie looks like, and I'm worried about Bernie's age. And I'm worried because I'm in Bernie's age range, and I'm worried that
I'm worried about my age. If I live,
I'm age conscious, but Bernie's in his 70s. We're going to elect a guy who's going to finish up.
I think this is how we had our first little dispute on Facebook about that, where you brought that
about age,
about Bernie's age in particular, and
I think it's something you have to consider.
You know what you can do. I know what I can do. I'm a senior citizen. I've lost some. I've lost a step, but everybody
I identify
comes on
with
a
that.
different level, and he could lose a lot of steps and still be far ahead of what's going on.
So you're going to go with him all the way, then, as I understand.
I will.
In other words, Hillary's a lost cause, but Hillary's a winner because she's the devil we know.
Yes. But then we're a loser because we have status quo, things as they've always been. She is a Republican. She is not a Democrat. She has a son-in-law from Goldman Sachs and this, that, and the other thing. They are millionaires. We have 100.
I know what they are, and I know they're doing it in a lot of ways that we shouldn't like. Bill, she goes to a country, makes a deal with them. The deal is Bill gets to speak here for $10 million, and then I'll get you an oil deal. or I'll get you an arms deal, or I'll get you a this deal. Apparently there's a book out where she's made those deals right and left, and that foundation's made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars out of this.
Wow.
And, and she shouldn't, as a state, as a lead foreign policy person here, be making deals for Bill to speak. I mean, Bill goes to Canada. They're going to pay him millions of dollars to speak in Canada. Where did that come from? I mean, I'll pay $15 to hear Bill speak, but I don't think Bill's worth millions. He's a good speaker, but what do you want to give him to show up in Canada and give a speech?
Right.
But the point is, she doesn't win.
I have one point about the Clintons, and that's ecology. They let us down ecologically, and same thing for Obama. Obama signed a deal with Monsanto, and we've got GMOs. These people are above us. They don't eat what we eat. They eat the special foods that's grown somewhere else. You know something?
They also don't have our health plans either.
Right.
I mean, they got their own health plan.
Washington,
They've also got places outside the country. They got places all over the world where they can live. They're pulling out.
Except if
I understand a whole lot of our billionaires are getting out.
Bush and Cheney can't leave the country. They'll be arrested for war crimes. They are here.
Cheney's an evil man.
Cheney's evil.
I'm not a Cheney guy. I mean, I've watched Cheney over the years, with evolving. He's not my guy.
The Scooter Libby thing was absolutely disgraceful. He outed a CIA agent, CIA agent, just because her husband wrote an article about in the press about her or about him. These are crazy. These are power-hungry fuckers. They took.
Well, Cheney's first job with Nixon was to nail journalists. If a journalist does something wrong, he gets the government after the journalist. I mean, Cheney never liked journalists. He never saw journalists he liked. And also, I have a suspicion we just lost a daughter because she didn't get a transplant in time. And then Cheney shows up and needs a heart. Cheney doesn't, and that's metaphorical.
Yeah.
On that note, I mean, he needs a heart. He's needed a heart all along.
He does need a heart. Oh, yeah, he needed one a long time ago for a lot of reasons.
So he got this one, but he got this one in a hurry.
What gets me, and I'm not a big proponent of the South in any way. South had South had culture, if nothing else, and the South has South Florida, where it's the Bible. The Jews have to go to.
Well, Florida's another world.
Another world, but not all of Florida is another world. But the South sucks. But the best part of the South was New Orleans. It had culture, it had food, it had music, it had everything, and it also had a dam that was about to break. And there was money appropriated to fix that dam.
That was
because
Bush.
Next storm, they said, it's going to go for that. Well, they took money out of
that. That was the Army Corps of Engineers. That was Bush. He put the money into a bridge in Alaska.
Right.
He didn't want to get the dam. He wanted the bridge in Alaska. He didn't want the dam. But the Army Corps of Engineers said for years, this won't hold. Right. And the other thing about that is, have you wondered yet?
Right.
Have you wondered yet what happened to those people?
Contract to fix up New Orleans. Who is Halliburton got the contract?
Yeah, Halliburton. That outfit also got the contract to fix up Iraq after the first war. They get the contract all the time. But the whole point of that is, what happened to those people?
Kids out there that don't know who owns the major part of Halliburton, that's Cheney. And
Casper and Weinberger and a bunch of those people, they all came out of Washington. But what happened to those people?
Friend, Brother Scott says it's not fascism because boots haven't touched the ground. Well, fascism.
That's a great comment, by the way. It's only fascism.
Right.
But what happened to those people?
In a new world, this is fascism. I don't care what. It's as close to being fascism.
But where did they go?
Business works with government in a negative way, with people end up suffering. Not only lives lost, but history lost, museums.
That's the other part. The other part are the revisionists in various administrations who decide that.
Well,
I mean, they really are wiping out history. And this is a quote.
I wrote a movie where doctors of humanity get into a time machine, go back, and tie Barbara Bush's tubes.
That's a great line. That's one of the best lines I've heard.
Right?
That's terrific. That really is good. But I really like that. But what happened in New Orleans? What happened to the people in New Orleans when it was all said and done, and
they went into a big stadium and
they were never heard from again?
No, I'm telling you, Barbara Bush made a speech. I remember this like it was yesterday. She said, those people, all the toilets were clogged in the stadium. They couldn't get food in to feed everybody. It was a horror show. No showers, days and days. Barbara Bush says, well, at least they have someplace to go.
At least the Department of Gentrification came in and fixed it all.
Right.
Or whatever you want to call that. Whatever you want to call the people who rebuilt it.
You lost all that. You could. It's a crazy world.
No question. But I'm wondering where people are going. I mean, I'm looking at a lot of this, and I'm a little scared that people disappear. I mean, I can't believe that there's never been a reporter down there to go through those communities, those expat New Orleans communities, to find out how those people are living.
Well, a lot of them came to California. I know that a lot of folks came out.
Texas,
where I am in
California.
Place. Texas, yeah, they migrated, but they lost votes, and that was all part of it. Getting back to the original thing. These people were evil. Bush was not evil. Bush was stupid. Not the
Which one are you talking about now? One of the which of the three are you? The third one was not bright.
By no means. The third one is by no means bright. The second one was kind of bright, but not book bright. Not bright enough to be president, but bright enough to just be to serve the very rich and cater to his people, and everything will go, the gun manufacturers, everything will go good. But the first Bush was very bright. The CIA, president of the CIA.
The first Bush had a lot of sinister doings going on, before he got in there. That he was the CIA stuff. Anybody who's connected to the CIA kind of frightens me in any way. Because he was a CIA guy, I think, when Kennedy was assassinated, and other things. I don't know.
I don't know that. There's so many. My theory is that it was.
Where were you, by the way? Where were you when Kennedy was assassinated?
I have an alibi.
That was good, because that was a defining experience for all of us.
Yes.
That was a remarkable experience.
Sixth grade, not sixth grade. I was in high school. And Joel Zucker sat behind me, and they came into class. They said Kennedy was shot, and I turned around. I saw look on Joel Zucker's face, and I went, "Whoa, this is very scary." It changed everything. It was Camelot. It was all unreal what we were seeing. It wasn't what we thought it was.
No, it was television.
Right. It was just drama. However, it was well done drama, and it was enticing. And to think that Johnson, this Southern schmagegi who is going to be running, this stuff, we didn't. We're just kids. You just they were images. We had no idea. My theory is it was Hoover and Johnson, and whatever powers they be, the FBI to bump the guy off.
You think there are books out that Johnson did it?
Yeah, well, I think they had the most to lose and the most to gain, respectively. That's how
one of the most indelible experiences of my life was I was where was I? I was doing I was working in Virginia, and I was working in a department store in Montgomery Wards, and all of a sudden it comes out on the loudspeaker. the president has been assassinated. And I'm working in a men's department, and I said to the guy in charge, I said, what happened? And he said, the president of Montgomery Wards has just been killed, you idiot. And then somebody else got on the speaker and said, this is the season. It's the Christmas season coming up. Let's be good neighbors. Let's do this. Let's do that. And then the president was gone. And then the next day, I was over a girlfriend's house, and this is the last time I ever saw her. And we're watching on television Oswald. Here comes Oswald. Here comes here comes the Dallas police. Here comes the basement. Here comes Ruby. and they shoot Oswald, and then they replay it. The first time I ever saw a replay, they're replaying it from all these angles. And then I said to her, I said, shot him up. It was the first thing that came to mind. They shot him up, and then she said, good thinking. And then she went west, and I never saw her again. But that was the most amazing moment. I never forgot that moment in that house with that girl and her parents sitting around a tiny little television set watching a replay. The first replay I ever saw. It may have been the first replay on television ever. It was like, now we're going to take a look at, let's see the holding call. But it was an amazing that time for me was unbelievable. And every November the 22nd for my classes, I have them pretend they were in Dallas. In Dealey Plaza. And what did you see?
Right.
Because that, to me, defined a generation. Absolutely. I never got over that. And then again, people say if he lived, it might have been worse. I don't know.
But I remember the book that came out was Rush to Judgment by Mark Lane.
Right.
Shortly after it came out. And it was, it was my first real thing. We're being lied to. There were so many things that they couldn't all be coincidences. And what really made me know that we're being lied to is that much of the evidence was put in to some sort of secret container or whatever for 75 years from the time of his death.
Yeah. And incidentally, on that note, you've got Roosevelt's estate that's still locking up the World War II stuff. I mean, so you know that that it was all fudged, and we'll never know who did it.
Right. Or they except it up. So with that in mind, the sheep, we the people, we go and then people that sit on the Warren Commission, somebody like Gerald Ford, sits there, and he gets the job. A man who sat in Congress for 38 years and got no bill passed, not one single bill in his name was passed as a congressman. This was a do-nothing kind of guy, a friend of the party, just keep it all going, and they pardoned Nixon, and nothing, boom, 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 everything.
Nothing at all, but Saturday Night Live had a good time with them. They got off the ground with Gerald Ford, so you got to give them credit for something. When he fell down, Saturday Night Live must have done that bit 100 times. He tripped or something leaving the podium. And Saturday Night Live. I mean, the sad thing is, you know by your comedy, by you like comedy. You know by comedy and how politically you can get with comedy and how politically incorrect you can get with comedy pretty well who's running the show. Because if you can't make fun of your president, and you could, and all of a sudden, after 9/11, you couldn't make fun of Bush anymore. Do you remember That's Our Bush? That there was a TV program, an hysterical TV program about Bush, a parody of Bush.
I don't.
It was I have tapes of it. It's the funniest thing you've ever seen, where he's got a dinner party, with Mrs. Bush playing because he hasn't had a meal with her in weeks. And then he's also got the pro-lifers in and the other side in. And the pro-lifers are bringing in an embryo around the White House. And he's trying to, and some neighbor says, why don't you do two dinners? and you can run from dinner to dinner. And he's chasing the embryo around the house while his wife's wondering, what is he doing? And it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. Then you had 9/11, and there was no more joke. And nobody jokes about the president right now. And that scares me, because if you can't joke about them, I mean, you're comfortable. You could joke about some of them, and when you can joke about them, you know you've got a pretty good situation going on here.
Absolutely.
You can look at that, and you can look at some other things. But when was the last time you heard a good joke about this president, except on Bill Maher and some of the
a joke about a president is a self-completing phrase.
Yeah. I mean, it scares me because, you've got to be able to laugh at politics. We had Mort Saul, we had Shelley Berman, we had a whole slew of people who did nothing but laugh at politics over the course. They built. Remember, what's his name? The one who did Kennedy, Vaughn Meader. Remember him?
Vaughn Meader. They had a whole album out, and as somebody who listens,
and he's gone. He was gone. He turned into a drunk.
He sounded more like Teddy than he did his brother.
But he had it. He had the voice. I've got the album. He had the voice. And he was so good. But as soon as Kennedy was gone, he was gone.
Yes.
He built a whole career on that. But I still say, if you can't laugh at him, you're in trouble.
That's right. Well, that's one thing this country has. We do have satire, and we do have humor, and that's...
At your own risk now.
All the time.
I think it's a very cautious kind of humor now, and it's a much more polite kind of humor. I think you've got to be able to laugh hysterically at some of this stuff. Nobody's laughing. Nobody's laughing at the Iran deal, and nobody's laughing at the Palestinians, and nobody's laughing at ISIS, and nobody's laughing at. You should be able to make fun of ISIS.
Well,
these guys are crazy. If you can't make fun of them, but then people are scared. If you make fun of them, they'll come after you.
Right.
That's
Sam,
the other thing. The most dangerous people in the society are the. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Tell me about your book and how that got started and what your writing process is.
Okay. 25 or 30 years ago, I came out of a situation where I was kind of like first job working for an ethnic newspaper, and the publisher wanted to de-ethnic it. He wanted to go secular, and that was the theme. The theme of the book is he wants to go secular. The kid has a religious identity problem and wants to go spiritual. So it's on the page. It's a page war. It's a space war on the pages between secular and religious. And the publisher's always saying, his land for peace, space for peace. What's the difference? This is the publisher. And the publisher's hysterical over this. The publisher has other problems, but the publisher basically wants secular. He wants more advertising, and he wants more readers. So the kid has an all-out war with them. And the war goes on and on and on, and the war gets more bitter. And there are other subplots in the book. But the book, it's called Haskalah. It means enlightenment, and the publication is called Haskalah. And the kid's war escalates finally because the publisher wants to get rid of his 3 printers in the basement and put in computers. So the 3 printers put out an all bigot issue in retaliation. They're listening through the vents, and they're hearing they're going to be gotten rid of. So they put out an all bigot issue. And the publisher doesn't think they could have done it, so he thinks his editor does it, and he takes out a contract on them, among other things. Oh. Because the editor sandbags the publication. All of a sudden, it becomes the 3 guys in the basement who are old World War II veterans and aren't going to take being dislodged. They're going to be that's their diaspora, that's their exodus. They're going to be thrown out of their basement apartment where they got the print shop, and they take them on. And he likes them, and he's sort of the basement guy, and these guys can't come up out of the basement. That's the symbolism. But the other symbolism in the book that was clear as glass to me was Jewish is journalism, because we don't exist without a written record of our history.
Yes. That's it.
We are the journalists of history and Bible. And I had a friend. He was a pastry chef. He got out of Berlin in 1939. He said that's the compliments of the Gestapo. He was the last train out of Berlin. So he learned English by writing, and he wrote a book where the middle of the book is Joseph somehow linking the Egyptian experience, within in a written record that survives. That was his fictional account of it. If Joseph didn't write that, nobody would have ever known about the Exodus. Nobody would have ever known where they went, and nobody would have ever known anything. So the purpose of my book is to establish that historically and biblically, over a period of time, we are the journalists of civilization.
How do you write?
And that's the theme. That's the theme of the book. And I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, how do you write? Do you write when things occur to you, or do you have a set time that you say, well, I'm going to go write for 3 hours and I can't be interrupted? How does that work?
No, I'm basically, I write as easily as, I just write. I've gotten to a point, I came out of a writing program, and since then, for the last 30, 40 years, I write every day, to a point where you say to me something like immigration, and I'll write 30 pages on it. You say to me something like the president, and I'll write 30 pages on it. You say to me something like the history of the Jews, and I'll write 30 pages on it. I mean, I tend to overwrite and overembellish, but the point is, writing to me is a lifeblood. I mean, I can't not write. If something hits me, I write, and the Facebook to me is a little bit of therapy and a whole lot of fun. I mean, I love it, and you get people on. You see the people on Facebook. There's some crazies on there. I mean, and you have a good time with them. I mean, why not? And there's some very bright people on there, and you have a good time with them too.
On all sides too. That's what's really confusing. And I always like to use the expression, "Faith is faith." I don't have faith in certain things, but there are certain people that do have faith. I have to respect that. So I have to differentiate that it isn't what they believe in. It's the go-between, the middlemen and women of their cults that get.
It's the people in the margins,
right? Yeah.
If you want to position them, the real faith, real history, real everything doesn't come from any kind of a leadership or an organizational pattern. This is where we started. It comes from the people in the margins. They define history.
I just can't be more clear with that, because I inadvertently turn people off, both on Facebook and in life, when people don't see what I'm getting at. And
well, I know exactly what you're getting at. You have every right to get at it, because it's the most disappointing thing in the world, that the thing that could be the best thing in the world is being destroyed.
Right. It really could be. And it fundamentally, if it wasn't made into a business with tax deductions and this, that, and that, it's a great idea. It's, and
or if it wasn't involved in politics. It's in bed with the politicians. The World War II, the Catholic Church in World War II was in bed with Hitler. In the late 1920s.
They turned in more Jews than anyone else. Could not have been a Holocaust without their assistance.
And then in the late 1920s, the National Socialist Party coming out of Germany was a fledgling party with no money. They go to the Vatican, they come back, and they got money. And all of a sudden they take off. I mean, who knew? Basically, who knew? That's a big question for you, by the way. If you knew, and you talked about travel, time machine travel, and getting to Barbara Bush, but if you knew Hitler was, if you knew Hitler in the 30s was going to be Hitler in the 40s, would you have taken a shot at him?
Oh, of course.
But then somebody says, hey, he hasn't done anything yet. I mean, he's a bad guy, but he hasn't done anything yet.
Yeah, of course.
That's the whole point.
If you knew, then how would you know if he hadn't done anything? All that's.
Do you remember the best Star Trek episode ever? Was they go back in time, and they wind up in the 30s in Chicago with this wonderful Save the World social worker. Do you remember this one?
I don't. I wasn't a big Star Trek person.
Well, this was beautiful. So they're stuck in the 30s trying to get out, and they all fall in love with this social worker who's going to save the world. But the social worker is a dove and a peacenik, and she doesn't want war. And they're looking a little bit into the future. She's going to get hit by a truck and run over. But if she doesn't get hit by a truck and run over, she's going to get to Roosevelt, and she's going to convince him to stay out of the war. and the Germans will win. And they're standing there on the curb, absolutely, with this tremendous angst on their faces, saying, "We can save her. Here comes the truck. There she goes. We can save her. But if we save her, the Germany will win the war." And they let the truck run over her. And it's one of the really indelible moments in television in terms of the big question. If you know what's going to happen, do you do something about it in advance of it?
Well,
if you you did Barbara Bush, you're going to stop Barbara Bush from having whatever Barbara Bush is going to have.
You just have all those doctors come in, one ties them up, the anesthesiologist,
No babies, Barbara. Sorry. You got to stop this.
And none of those little bastards are born, and that would be great. So.
But that's a great bit because you can think about people in history that you would like to make sure were never born. You're not technically. You get back into another issue. Do you believe in? But do you believe in whatever you believe in? Do you believe that you should stop the birth of children, or do you believe that that's kind of a murder in and of itself? That's a big question that politicians avoid religiously.
Birth of children, that the children aren't children until they're born. They're fetuses.
In other words, you don't think that whatever is going on in the evolution, in the process of birth, is a human being at this point.
Well, it's a human. It's a lie. It's a child after it's born. It's a fetus before.
But not before.
But not before. No. Until obviously not. It's not a fully till it's.
That's a dangerous position in this day and time. I'll tell you.
But they did put two words in the dictionary: one baby and one fetus. So it's not me that's calling attention to this for the first time. You can't kill me as the messenger. And there comes to the idea, everybody wants to take care of the fetus, these pro-lifers, but they don't give a fuck about the baby once the baby's born. Because the baby's on welfare.
That's a good point.
Take the welfare away. The baby's getting food stamps. Hey, no, it doesn't take that much to feed the baby. Cut the food stamps in half.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. We had a friend in our writing program, and he was a beautiful man who was moving through the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. And at the time, he was the editor of a prominent publication, and he took a position on birth control, and he took a position on abortions, and that pretty well destroyed a career. They stuck him somewhere, and we never heard from him again. But he was a wonderful man. And I guess his logic was, if you got 12 kids and you're starving, and you're sitting there in some South American country starving with your 12 kids, maybe the church should step in and say, you should have had 3 kids instead of 12 or something. I don't know. I don't know where the church is going with this. But the church, I'm told the church sells condoms.
Really?
As one of its ancillary businesses. I'm not sure. Somebody told me that. I'm just pissed. Because they got a lot of businesses, among other things. They do.
I don't know if you heard me. I heard that they sell the most anal bleach in the whole world. They bring in the market.
Really?
I don't know. Yeah. So,
you don't know what they're doing most of the time, but they're always doing something that's a little.
I know they're
a little bit. Dan Brown really blew it. I don't know if you follow the Dan Brown. And the other one, the book that came out before Dan Brown, 20 years before. And the best book I ever read on the church was something, I don't know if you're a Robert Ludlum fan. He writes the good spy novels. Anyway, he wrote something called The Gemini Contenders. Great, great book. You got to read this, where you read the entire book to find out what happens on the last page. And twins in Italy, a very prominent family, are growing up in the World War II years, and they split up, and one of them becomes a wonderful, wonderful humanitarian type, powerful man. The other one becomes vicious. But before they split up, while they're children, a group of monks are burying something somewhere off their property, and then all the monks are killed. You don't know what it is, and you spend the whole book trying to figure out what it is. And I won't tell you what it is, but on the last page, the twins fight it out for the book. The Catholic Church wants it, the Russians want it, the Americans want it, whatever they buried. Everybody wants it because it is the cornerstone. It's pretty well established. Whoever gets it understands what the cornerstone of civilization is about. And I will read The Gemini Contenders. It's the best book I've ever read on this subject, and I've read 4 or 5 books on this subject. The same subject, but this one, when they finally dig it up.
If you will allow me to go back on something that you mentioned, that you're a basketball fan, and I put 2 and 2 together. You're from Maryland. Do you remember the Bernie and Ernie show?
Bernie and Ernie?
Ernie Grunfeld.
Tell me about that, and I'll tell you whether I remember it.
Oh, they were just.
I don't remember.
Bernard King and Ernie Grunfeld were just 2 All-Americans.
Oh yeah, King was, and then King's brother was here with the Washington team, and Grunfeld came in with the owner Abe Pollock, I guess Abe Pollock or Abe whatever, and he died, and then Grunfeld's still here. And I followed this for years. I followed basketball here when we had bullets in an arena on Monroe Street with Fat Freddie Scolari, Kenny Sailors, let's see, who else was there? Paul Hoffman, Ed Miller, and this was their night. This was their night war. They had a day job, and then they would bring in the Fort Wayne Zollner Pistons and the Minneapolis Lakers.
George Yardley and those guys.
Yeah, Yardley was an early great shooter, and the Zollner Pistons had who they had? They had Mel Hutchins. And Yardley was, I remember Yardley. But these guys, Paul Arizin, Joe Fawkes, and Neil Johnston were from Philly. And then Cousy came in with Sharman and the Jones boys and Red Auerbach. And then he got a hold of Russell by trading Ed McCauley to the St. Louis Hawks for Russell, for the draft rights to Russell. Changed the whole game.
Easy Ed McCauley, if I recall.
Yes, McCauley, I thought that was a bad trade. Because McCauley was a wonderful player, and who knew who Russell was? Russell came off the West Coast, and nobody ever heard of him. But apparently Auerbach saw something in Russell. And meanwhile, Russell turns out, over the years, I followed this, Russell turns out to be one of the smartest guys in sports ever. You listen to Russell interviewed. Russell is a wizard.
Great books. He wrote 3 or 4 great books that were...
And Alcindor Jabbar is one of the brightest guys, too. I mean, Muslim aside, and getting his house burned down aside, and all the crap he's gone through by being part of that. Jabbar is, I mean, I've got a magazine where Jabbar, a Sports Illustrated, where Jabbar is just leaving New York to come to the West Coast, and he's already writing articles on what he sees in John Wood and what he sees in the West Coast. And he's bright. I mean, this guy is nobody's fool. This guy's one of the brightest people in sports. And he's a good guy. Besides, he's a very decent guy. You look at the athletes today, and coach says play D, I play D. Coach says shoot, I shoot. Coach says, I mean, these people, and then they got this, you know stuff. I mean, they can barely talk, and I don't know where they're going with this.
Life changes. I don't know who to blame for that. I would simply blame it on society that.
Our athletes are our idols. I mean, they're killing kids. They don't realize the terrible legacy they're leaving kids. I mean, I don't know. There was a guy named Harry Edwards on the West Coast who was a sports psychologist who was warning kids 20 years ago because he looked at the numbers. And at the time, you had 500,000 kids playing high school basketball. You had 50,000 kids playing college basketball, and you had 500 playing professional basketball. And these kids were out on the streets 24 hours a day, getting their game together with the chance of winning a lottery and getting from high school to pro. And Harry Edwards was saying, hey, do something else. They're not doing anything else. This is it.
2 things. First of all, that market is expanded for kids. Kids play in Europe.
Yeah, they can play in Europe now.
All over the world, A. And B, he's underestimating. You just go to college and get your free ride. You don't have to play pro. You can get enough out of college, and even if it isn't the academics, a lot of it is the social aspect of going to college. And
but it's a year and out. They don't finish. They don't get past the second year.
But yes, absolutely. It's a flawed system. It's semi-pro, but it builds libraries. So, you look at both sides.
It pays the bills, yes, what you're saying.
Right, it pays the bills, exactly. It's a
and that's why the basketball
in,
coach is making $2 million a year and the college president's making $300,000.
Right.
It's never made any sense to me either.
Sam, where can we get your book?
It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble, and it's been out a couple of years, and I get good feedback on it fairly. And there's a second book, and I don't know if I mentioned to you, I got smart finally after writing for years and years and sending out manuscripts and not getting anywhere. I got smart. I married an editor, and whose relative is a publisher.
Wow.
So my advice to wannabe writers is marry an editor whose relative is a publisher. So in this context, she edited this book from top to bottom. She knows a lot about Bible. She knows a lot about other things. There's funny stuff. This is a dark book, but it's very funny. I mean, the kid, as the editor, admits at the beginning, I'm a creative writer. If I don't have any news, I'm going to make it up. So the first thing he realizes is he has a wedding and engagement page. And if nobody gets married or engaged that week, the advertisers are going to be mad as heck because they paid extra to be on those pages. So he makes up weddings and engagements.
That's just yellow.
And it's a very funny page where he admits it. But he puts somebody here. You can't find him. Somebody from London's married somebody from Ann Arbor, here. And it's funny. And then he's got other things he does. He's literal. But you can get it from Barnes & Noble and you can get it from Amazon. But he's a literal editor, which is the kiss of death. You do not want to be a literal journalist. Where he covers a basketball game and he sees one of the players from one team sneak into the locker room and steal stuff from the other team. So he reports that. Stealing wallets and watches from the other team's lockers, he reports it. And that's not what you're writing about, but that's what he does. And then he goes to a Jewish day school called the Shtetl School, where the kids are all dressed up like Lithuanians and Polish and Russian, and they dress like the 18th century, villages. And then somebody runs in and yells, "The Russians just attacked the Poles," meaning the 8th grade just attacked the 7th grade. So he puts a headline in the paper, "The Russians just attacked the Poles." Then he interviews, there's a Messiah in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Guy running around in a shroud saying, "I'm the Messiah." He goes up there to interview him. So the Messiah says to him, he says, "Well, what happened that day? Well, tell me what happened that day, when the Romans this and the crowd that." And the guy says, the Messiah says, "They got Mo." So he says, "Mo?" He said, "Yeah, Mo was in prison all mixed up. They got Mo." So his headline is, "Messiah of Lancaster says they got Mo." And the publisher comes running in yelling, "What's this?" Wait a minute here. But I had a good time with this kind of stuff because you turn this guy loose. You turn a literal journalist loose. With a religious publication, he's got problems. I mean, he's going to cause havoc. And I had a good time with it anyway.
Anything you left out of the book that you wish you would have put in? The first book?
Yeah, a lot of stuff. There's so much I could have put in. I hit Atlantic City in the casino years, in the early casino years, and I could have done more with that. And there were a lot of, and I got him doing a natural childbirth interview with a kind of a dirty old man doctor that's hysterical that I could have done more with. And with the publisher and some of the other people. The publisher is absolutely bizarre. The publisher is a drunk who stutters, and the only time he can speak well is when he's drunk. So when he's sober, he stutters. And then he's got his salesman as the translator. And that's a funny part. And every time he runs into the publisher, and then he brings in writers. He brings in his own writers, and his writers are usually deadbeats. They're kind of like off the top religious people who have been sort of excommunicated from whatever jobs they've ever had. But there's a lot of stuff in it, and I've had people read it who tell me they're in stitches. They're absolutely in stitches over it. because I mean, I thought I was doing Philip Roth, Goodbye Columbus, some early middle class stuff, Jewish stuff, but I got into things that nobody's gotten into yet, and it's kind of like if you were in the kitchen, you wouldn't eat the meal. And I mean, it's really I didn't realize how brutal I got with it. But the interesting thing about it is, at the beginning of the book is a family tree. And this is real. This is real. Our family tree, my grandfather did this family tree. We're related to King David. Really. We are really related to King David. We go back to King David. And I always tell people I can't put it on a resume. I'd like to. Say, here's my reference.
Yeah.
You know, but the family tree is in the beginning.
For one's head. Good for one's head. Hey, you've been a delight. I hope you'll consent to come back.
Oh, I'd love to. By the way, I mentioned to you my brother-in-law, Prince Mensa.
Okay.
You might be interested in talking. I mean, he did the best presentation I've ever seen on immigration and assimilation, and it's topical. How he got here, how he saw us from his perspective. He's doing it at Tocqueville. And if you want to talk to somebody thematically about immigration, and he's got his parents here, you know, and he's dealing with whatever he's dealing with. But if you want to talk to somebody who knows more about immigration than anybody else, I mean, Prince, his name is Prince. They named him Prince. He knows more about immigration than anybody.
You couldn't find.
And he would be a great interview on that.
You couldn't find a brother-in-law that's a prince? You had to find one with the name of Prince?
They named him Prince so he wouldn't forget that he was a prince.
Okay.
So
Sam,
his name is
you.
Prince.
I'm going to end the show the way I do virtually everyone I do. I'm going to implore you to keep your dreams wet and your humor dry and keep on keeping on. How's that?
Wonderful. Thank you. And, Ralph, it was a pleasure talking to you. I kindred spirit. I feel like you've got a really good idea here, and I hope you take it to as many levels as you can, because there isn't enough just open. Oh, incidentally, one more thing, real quick. Are you familiar with Anna Devere Smith? She's an actress who does one-woman shows, and she wrote a book called Between the Lines, and she got to Clinton. And she said she got the real Clinton, because an actress or an actor can get real, whereas a journalist can't, which I thought was kind of interesting. She said theater is more real than journalism. It's an interesting take. Anyway, on that note, it was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. You'll come back, and I hope you had fun.
Oh, I had a great time. I enjoyed it very much. I really do. As I said, I feel like you're a kindred spirit. And keep up whatever you're doing, because it works.
That makes me happy.
Okay.
What I'm doing is just talking to interesting people and enjoying my life by so doing, so I don't get old. And
are you doing any Studs Terkel stuff?
You know what?
You're the guy with the tape recorder who walks the streets and talks to the pharmacist and the steel worker.
If anybody gets the chance to read a book that will change your life, it did mine. It made me a sociologist, and you have to be the.
Let me get your book then. What's your book?
No. Studs Terkel is the book.
Oh, Studs Terkel. Okay, yeah. Then okay. I thought you said your book. Okay, Studs, because I love what he does.
I'll tell you what I'm writing, and this is true. I'll announce this on my show for the first time. My lovely friend and I are producing a pop-up book on baseball.
Okay. You may be interested in this. As a lifelong baseball fan, my father owned a team. My father in 1933 bought a team. He was a pharmacist who just got thrown out of the University of Maryland. An anti-Semitic dean threw him out. He was teaching chemistry. So he bought a baseball team. Called, at the time, the Baltimore Black Sox. And I've got a novel on it that I'm trying to sell. And it's 1933.
I don't know if you know that I am a baseball fanatic, and much of this show is based on baseball.
I would love to have talked to you about it. We'll talk about baseball sometime because my father in 1933, he's approached. He's 21 years old. He's approached a Negro League baseball team. He buys the Baltimore Black Sox. He owns a team, and all of a sudden he's got them in the winter. And he said this team beat Major League All-Stars regularly. They beat Lefty Grove, teams with Grove, Ruth, Gehrig, these guys. And he owns the team in the winter, and then he gets involved with a gangster in the spring, and the gangster steals the team. And this is the basis of the book is my father fighting with a gangster. Only in America could a Jewish pharmacist own a Negro League baseball team and fight with Italian gangsters over ownership. That's the theme of that. It's called The Outlaw League.
And what's the name of that book, just out of curiosity?
It's called The Outlaw League, but it's still in a formative phase. I wrote it years ago, and I've got to cut it back, but it's a wonderful book. It's a time and place book. In fact, a movie producer had it, kept it for a year, and then cleaned out all his old projects and brought in new people, and they sent it back. But I understood he was very interested. It's a Baltimore-based book. And it hits home very, very well. And so my father had Lyman Yoakley, he had Dunn and Say, he had the best players in the world. And they used to beat in exhibition games, they beat the major league teams all the time. And then all of a sudden, here comes Gus Cambria, the scout. He was a scout. He was a Washington Senator scout later. He steals the team out from my father for $5 a game, a man more. So my father has a ballpark and no team. My father comes up with a team, and he still owns the name Black Sox. Cambria changes the name of the team to Light Giants, which is what they were known as into the 30s and into the 40s. And then, so my father has a team, and he plays one game against retired Philadelphia Athletics All-Stars with Al Simmons, Jimmy Fox, Mickey Cochran, and these guys. And in the first, he doesn't know who he's playing, and he doesn't know what he's got, but he doesn't have Lyman Yoakley, Dunn and Say, the shortstop, second base. He doesn't have any of these guys, but he has a team. He puts them out on the field. He's got 3,000 or 4,000 people in the stands waiting for the old Black Sox who aren't there. And the score is 21-0 in the first inning before my father, they're tearing the stadium apart. My father gets on the loudspeaker and returns all the money. And he's out. He's out of the game. But it was a funny, so I took that, and I heard these stories over the years about my father's baseball team, and I wrote the Outlaw League. My father actually thought at one point, if he couldn't integrate, he thought he was Branch Rickey in 1933, if he couldn't integrate anybody, his players, he knew his players were going to eventually get there, and he wanted to be part of it. So he thought Johnny Mize, he hears about Johnny Mize in New Jersey. He says, if I can't integrate them into the major leagues, I'll bring white players into this league. And that was his idea, and Johnny Mize was going to be one of them. That was part of the book, was what he was trying to do to get this done. But it's a wonderful time and place story. And he's in the drugstore. The drugstore is a world unto itself. He's got his team. He's got the drugstore. He's got the house with the 3 generations in it. And he tells his Yiddish-speaking mother, his non-English-speaking mother, he tells, I bought these guys. And he brings them home. And the mother's going, great, you can't buy people. He says, they play for me. And he's trying to explain what they do. And she's mad as hell, and she chases them all out. It's a very funny book, really. I got to work on it. But anyway, enough on that. We'll talk baseball sometime.
That will be great. Thank you, Sam. This is terrific, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man. Adios.
Very good. And again, Ralph, it was a pleasure. You take care.
My pleasure, sir.
Bye. Bye.